Okay, so let me get some dates here for you. Okay, I think, okay, we say 4000 BC. Some of these artifacts, they've been found like pre-flood stuff, but most of the rise of the civilization came after this point. This would be 2300 BC is when the flood, 2300 BC. This is an estimate, obviously. So that would be like, God covers the earth. It's the lowest, one of the lowest points in all of human history. So the flood, 2300 BC. And at this point, we know that the Tower of Babel was built in the plain of Shinar. Nimrod was a mighty hunter. He was trying to build this thing up into the earth, and then God confused the languages, and then the Sumerian and the Egyptian civilizations. These two civilizations were the first two really great civilizations of these eras before, I guess from this point until maybe, until the destruction of the Egyptian civilization, which was during Moses' time. So we have, Abraham was called out of Ur, the Chaldees, about 2000 BC. So Earth, maybe this is Eden. We could say that, 4,000, and then the flood. So 1,700 years maybe of God allowed the, people. And remember, people lived, like Methuselah lived 969. So he lived like, half of that, 1,700. So a lot of people living a long time, very great wickedness. The flood comes. The Fertile Crescent is established. Sumerians, established the culture. The culture was, their culture started to spread a little bit because of trade. It's kind of interesting. There's trade. Trade routes became a part of the picture. Commerce. Commerce became a part of the picture as like the civilizations. They began to talk to each other. You have something I like to eat. I have something you like to look at. Gold is pretty. Food is tasty. Here's my gold. Give me the tasty food. And that started happening. That's basically what commerce is, and that's the way it happened. People gave gold for food, and it became the way that the monetary system established itself. So the complexities of society led to like this idea of a king. Lugal this is a word. This is a Sumerian word, Lugal, and it literally means big man. Big man. We need a big man. We need a big man to make all the decisions. So that's that idea of a central direction and a military leader who would protect our food supply and build our forts and lead us in battle. That started to come about in the Sumerian. About the time of Abraham, the third dynasty, like you could say 3 dynasties, which is usually what's a dynasty when you see this term. It's like a family that tends to be the ruling family. There's like a family that a dynasty is labeled as a family that rules. I think in England, the Windsors are still ruling. They've been ruling since, I don't know who was the first Windsor king or queen, but now they're into this century. It's been a couple of centuries now. Dynasty. So this is the third dynasty. So how many kings are in a dynasty? I don't know. We know that when we look at Israel, when we study Israel a little bit more detail next week, you'll see the dynasties that ruled in Judah and in Samaria in those kinds. Okay, so the interesting thing, 4 classes of people, nobles, big man nobles, like I said, nobles. There's like nobles, commoners, clients, and slaves. Those were like the big the groups of people. But let's talk about like the religion. What kind of religion existed in Sumer in this area? And most of the tablets that they've read say that it began with one God. One God. The Sumerians worshipped one God, and then his name was An, A-N, and it meant the God of heaven. So, which we can know. We know that the great, you look at this, I am, on, we know that this is what it is in English, the great I am that I am, but it is the God of heaven. And they departed from this practice and began to deify nature and other things. And by Abraham's day, they probably had 5,000 gods. But the temple, really, the temple was the center of the life. The temple was the center of their lives. They wanted, their politics, their education was all centered in what was going on in the place of worship. So really, it's what we see today. Our lives, our lives as people. My life, my family, my life is really, there's my family and what goes on at church, and well, you're a pastor, but really I think a lot of our lives, you're in Bible college because your life centers on learning how to be a better Christian, how to be a more Bible Christian, how to study the Bible, because you want to serve in your church. If that's our church here or another church, you want to serve more effectively in your church. So this idea that the temple would be the center of life is not new. It goes back to this first amazing civilization. The temple was the place where the politics was sort of discussed. We don't really discuss politics here. Education and business, it just gets messy. We talk about the Ravens, the football team, on the DVD, but we don't talk so much about the... That's there's only two ways that you can fail this class. There's only two ways you can fail my class, and one is like not to show up, and the other is to, rag on my football team. Okay? Yeah, thank you. All right, thank you. Thank you. So, okay. So there we go. Okay. Come on, the Westminster guys, you got to be with me because they practice up in your neighborhood, There we go. You got to, okay. All right, sorry. I'm sorry on the internet or on the DVD that we had a digression. Okay, so the temple is the center of life for there. Abraham believes God. That's in the midst of this. Abraham believes God. Now, we want to look at the old Babylonian Empire. So we had a picture of the Tower of Babel. So this is the Ishtar Gate here. This is later. So this is the second Babylon. We don't want to get to that yet. But sorry. You like that? You like that? It's just easier. I can go through all the... You got a bunch of pictures for you tonight. It's fun. All kinds of pictures. And some of them will go in the second part of class. But I want to find this. You want a picture of a raven from the game yesterday? Oh, I think I could find it. Okay, sorry. Okay, the first Babylonian ancient. Well, we'll go to ancient Babylon. Ancient Babylon. The ruins of that Babylon are still. They're about 54 miles, about 88 kilometers south. We don't want to talk about the Hittites yet either. But ancient Babylon. We're going to talk about the Hittites next. Ancient Babylon. Is the rise of the Akkadian Empire. Babylon became like a principal city. It's important for us to understand Babylon because it's going to be a city that's brought to mind all the way through the Scriptures. Will that be the actual place in Revelation? I don't think so, because the promise of Isaiah, is that nothing would inhabit Babylon ever again once it was destroyed at that point in 612, I believe, when the Medes and Persians came in and destroyed Babylon and took over that territory from Belshazzar, who was the son of Nebuchadnezzar. They haven't lived there. But, there is something I need to show you here. Where is it? We'll find it here. It's this tall thing. It's the code of this code here. This is Hammurabi code, okay? And this is the code. This is the picture on the top here. This also shows two things. Like, it shows a couple of things about, this is the Hammurabi receiving the code of law from the sun god. So there's two things being demonstrated here: the code of law and the law under the deity that they're worshiping there. And this code was developed 1792 BC. There was a king, and he had a great, strong influence over all of the Fertile Crescent area. And this is, he was this man who established these laws, and this was this third dynasty was called, it's called Babylonia for lack of a better word. It was a combination of after the Akkadians and after the after the Akkadians and after the Sumerians. This Babylonian, this first Babylonian era was ushered in by this man Hammurabi. Culturally, the Babylonians had like an idea of creation. They had their own kind of Genesis, and there is a god, and we have a picture of him. He's this bull god that's in the picture here. We'll see him in a second. There, let's make him bigger, bigger. Come on, there you go. There's a bull god there of that's one of the bull gods. That also is a god that's, of the Babylonians there. They were worshiping this god, Marduk, the bull calf of the sun. And, this is part of their picture. And, apparently in their leadership, there was a great champion. There was a great wrestling match. And, this god, wound up being the champion. So this is how they, and he told of an assembly of gods, like not an assembly of God, but an assembly of little gods. Sorry. But Marduk told of, like, it was the center of the universe, and this Marduk said that, communicated this to this people, that the center of the universe was Babylon. And then he built himself a luxurious house, and, he had, he became the, he became the center of their life, the center of their worship. So now Hammurabi, during this time, he was, he codified all these laws, and the idea, it's kind of interesting. This is what it said: gathering of these 300 laws. These Hammurabi had 300 laws so that justice would prevail in the land, to destroy the wicked and the evil, to prevent the strong from oppressing the weak, and to further the welfare of the people. So justice, punishment, protection of the weak, and welfare. That was the reason for the code of Hammurabi. But it just wasn't applied right. It wasn't applied. Consistently, And so, like, eventually, eventually the civilization crumbled, primarily because the God that they were worshiping wasn't really a God at all, but it was the biblical principle of Galatians 6. They reaped what they sowed, and the people after Hammurabi was out of the picture, the next king wasn't strong enough or gentle enough or kind enough to apply the justice of equity and equality and keep the civilization ruling, and primarily because their own gods were not gods of grace. They were warrior gods. They were gods that had very human characteristics: destructive, promiscuous, supernatural in the way of, like, having powers that were not possible for humans to have, but also having human frailties. So they made gods, that's what the Psalms say. I think it's Psalm 145. Those who make those kind of gods are like those gods. So it's the product of a vain imagination. So now it's interesting, the reason that we want to talk about this one civilization that's in the Bible for many years. We'll go to this. For many years here we are. For many years, there was only one place that mentioned this society called the Hittites. They're significant because they were the first ones to, like you could see here, the ironwork. Can you see that? It's a little dark there, but that's ironwork. They were the first ones to really use iron. Now, this last picture that I showed you, the previous picture, this was finally discovered in 1832. This culture. It's up near Turkey. It would be up near Turkey. It's up in the. Get back to the Fertile Crescent. There we go. Up in this area, Turkey. up in this area, which is now Turkey, in here. This is where, right there is where the Hittite Empire was. They were warriors. They came down. They controlled this whole area. But the only place that they were really mentioned as a people was in the Bible. And then in 1832, a German man and a Frenchman, Claude Texier, they found this place of the capital. It's called Hattusis, Hattussas, Hattusis. They found this capital in a place in Turkey, and it was the Hittite capital. And so the Bible was proven true. Voltaire, how many know Voltaire? He's the man who said that the Bible would go out of style or go out of fashion before he died, and then the French Bible Society now prints Bibles from the basement of the place he used to live in, or used to, or something like that. So there you go, Voltaire. Thank you very much. The rumors of Christianity's demise have been greatly exaggerated, to quote Winston Churchill. So Voltaire, this is one of the things that he ridiculed the Bible, because it says that the Hittites lived there and that the Israelites would drive out the Hittites. And there was no mention for many, many years, no proof that this existed. And then in 1832, we have this discovery of this. This was like a temple area. There's 2 lions. You see the 2 lions at the entrance there. And so they found this place and the excavations. And there's been more excavations by a German group. And, they established themselves in this area, this northern area. And they were welcoming. They were welcoming to the idea of language. They were maybe more mountain people because of where they were located, but they welcomed the language. So they took over the food supply, established their civilization, and then welcomed the art and culture and writing that came with it. And so they started to develop, the first really European language up in that area. I don't know what. The Hittite language is probably one of the first oldest European languages there, and this is confirmed by the documents, and not the documents, but the clay tablets that they found from this era. So, but that was a really significant thing in the 1800s for that to happen, because we have Darwin, we have atheism that's on the thing, we have Thomas Paine. I know that maybe you've heard some great things about Thomas Paine, Common Sense. He wrote this pamphlet that sort of energized Americans for their revolution, but he was also an atheist for the most part, from what I've read. I could be corrected, maybe he changed later on, but these kind of influences were going on. Voltaire, the French Revolution had happened. All kinds of things are trying to challenge the record of the Bible. Who are the Hittites? Who are the Hittites? And then this place is found. So the Bible is proven true, and that this empire that was, that worked with iron and did things, look at this, did these things. And there's the bull again, right? Right in the middle, there's a bull, 3 of them, 3 bulls. That's probably, we are stronger than you because we are 3 bulls strong. That may be what, we're coming down to get you, Babylonia, because we're 3 bulls strong. You're just an ox, and we're coming for you. And, and you see that might have been some sort of helmet or something. I don't know. We don't know. But they worked iron, and it was used, and it was not like, they did not use it as a weapon. That's the thing. They did not use this as a weapon. They used it, for hammering. They used it for tools. They used it to make things to cut with and all those kind of things. So they reached Babylon about 1600 BC, and they marched, and their empire lasted about, maybe 200 years, maybe a little bit longer than that. It started to collapse, maybe 400 years. It started to collapse, and primarily because of sea people. Okay, if you look at the territory of the Fertile Crescent, we see that this idea of coming across the water is going to be, is going to start playing a part in the warfare that's going on. So Egypt is starting to rise now. you have Egypt starting to rise as a civilization quietly, away from everything going on over here. Egypt is starting to rise. In about 1200 BC, there is a quick, there is sort of a quick collapse and, breakdown somewhere between 1200 and 1150 BC. The breakdown of the Hittites happens. And, they had 100, the center of their problems was their 100 gods, their system of gods. They had about 100 gods of the Hittites. The center of their gods were the storm god and his wife, the sun goddess. So they had a storm god named Teshubah and his wife, Hebat. So, those are just interesting. I just like to say those words, Teshubah, Hebat. So, anyway, sorry. So, that brings us really into, more into the center of the next civilization, which is the warrior civilization, which is the Assyrians. The Assyrians are really, this is their gods of war here that we're looking at. They worshipped, these gods of war. Oops, sorry, too big. They're gods of war there. And Assyria is mentioned in the Bible in 2 Kings 15 to 2 Kings 20. We read of Assyria, and it's also mentioned in Jonah and Nahum. Nineveh was its capital. Now we have a picture of what Nineveh looked like. This is the war god of there, and we have a picture here of this is what Nineveh looked like. So this is, is that good for you? So I can maybe make it a little smaller for that. We're taping this, but you could see just how, sophisticated. Does that look like people who are, need to evolve? That looks like pretty good. I've seen that in Jamaica somewhere. Looks like that place in Jamaica with the big slide and the dolphins and everything. But this is Nineveh. This is Nineveh. This is the book. This is mentioned. We're starting to move into the Bible. Like the Hittites are mentioned. We have, Ur the Chaldees. We'll talk about Abraham in the last third of the class tonight. But we see that this area laid northwest of Babylon, this empire. It was in the Fertile Crescent. It was up there, just south of where the Hittites were from. But this was Nineveh. This was its great capital. And we have this mentioned. So we can go to the Bible, open the Bible here in church and world history. We can open the Bible. We've had a lot of pictures. But in 2 Kings 15, remember we're moving through to get to the church age, because then the church, we're setting up what happened in the people of Israel. And we see these names mentioned. 2 Kings 15, Assyria begins to make itself known in the territory around here. Primarily, they were characterized by the kings that are mentioned in the scriptures are Pul, P-U-L. We have these names of these Assyrian kings in Scripture. Let's see, Assyrian Empire. Assyrian Empire, it's very warlike. This is they were really not really interested in. We don't have very much art and culture from them. Their art was war. That was really what they wanted to do. Was they wanted to take over the world. This was their goal. Nineveh was its capital. We see that there. That we see what they were like. That looks like a pleasant group of people. But really they were just bent on taking over. So in the scriptures, they have the kings that are mentioned in the scriptures. We'll see Pul, he's there. This Tiglath, Tiglath-Pileser, that's kind of a, interesting name. How'd you like your mom to name you that? What's your name? Tiglath-Pileser. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Just name Flacco. That'd be better. Sorry. No, I'm teasing, really. Shalmaneser. These are all kings that are mentioned in the scriptures for us to understand. Sargon, and then probably the most we know, Sennacherib, just because his story is described. is described in detail in two places, in Isaiah and 2 Kings. Three places, I think, 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, and also Isaiah. This is all explained there. Sennacherib, he's that last king. He's the last king, the last great king of the Assyrians. Bless you. Okay, so we see verse 19, and Pul, the king of Assyria, verse 19 of 2 Kings 15, Pul, the king of Assyria, came against the land, and Menahem gave Pul 1,000 talents of silver to his hand, that he might be with him to confirm the kingdom in his hand. So the Israel, now remember Israel, I have to say something about Israel here. We had Israel, and we had the southern kingdom, which is Judah. So Israel, in the scriptures, at a certain point, after the reign of Solomon, there is a competition for who's going to control the throne. Rehoboam is the son. He ascends to the throne. He speaks harshly to the people, and God separates 10 tribes out and gives them to an administrator, a man who used to manage the slaves for Solomon, and his name is Jeroboam. And Jeroboam moves north, establishes a capital, builds a golden calf in one part of the city, in one part of the country, and a golden calf in the north of the country, sets up his own priests, and cuts himself off from the rest of the tribes. 10 tribes. There's 12 tribes. Benjamin and Judah stayed with Jerusalem, and then all the Levites, who were the priests, moved back to Jerusalem. We'll explain this in more detail next week. But all those priests moved back to Jerusalem, so you had 10 tribes, Dan and all the rest of the tribes that came from Jacob were now worshiping in the north, and their territory was the first one. They quickly turned to idolatry. These 10 tribes quickly turned to idolatry, and God sent them the first two major prophets of the Old Testament, really, Elijah and Elisha, were sent to this group of people, were sent to this people in the north. And they did all their miracles in the north and all of their things. And God sent men to them to get them back on course with God, but it didn't happen. And so they were taken captive. They were taken captive 721 BC. This northern kingdom was taken captive, and it became a part of the Assyrian Empire. And what empires do, and this is what the Soviet Empire did, and you still find this now that we are ministering in all these places, we find people who used to be Siberian or should be in Siberia. They were moved to the south. People from the south were moved to Siberia. People from the west were moved to the east, and vice versa, to try and separate the pockets of ethnic solidarity. This was something that the communists tried to, really in effect establish their own Babel. Let's move people around, or tear down, let's say. They tried to reverse Babel. They tried to reverse Babel and make everyone the same, moving all these different peoples to different parts of the Soviet Empire. The Assyrians did the same thing, the Babylonian Empire that comes next, the Chaldean Empire that comes after this. They did the same thing. They would move people. And that's what happened. Israel was moved. This group of people, the tribes of Dan, Issachar, Ephraim, Manasseh, all these tribes, the members of all these tribes who were once apart, who marched out with Moses, all these tribes were absorbed and scattered throughout the territories that the Assyrians controlled. And they became servants and slaves in other parts of the world. So we see in Jonah, we see that God does have a heart for all these people. It's kind of interesting. God does have it's like we read the story of Jonah and we know it because Jesus quotes it. How do we know that how do we know that Jonah was swallowed by a whale? Jesus said so. So that's just my answer. Jesus said he was swallowed by a whale. So, everyone says, well, how can that happen? Jesus told me, and Jesus said it, I believe it. It's good enough for me. So Jonah, we see he's told to arise and go to Nineveh, that great city. So we saw the look of that city. Look at that. That's the great city of Nineveh. That's the great city that's spoken there. And you can see there was about 120,000 people, maybe more in there. But Jonah, I don't know why, I know why, because I got Noah open right there in front of me. Close that so I can't see it. Okay, so Jonah, spoke against this, against this city. Jonah spoke of the judgment to come on this city, and the king humbled himself. So we see that God has a heart for the world. God will bring his person into the place of influence. So we know the Jonah story. And when you think about it, maybe the whale came up the river, which would be another kind of miracle, like a whale coming up the river. Maybe he was vomited out like right there. That'd be like, you're like having your picnic there. Yeah, we're just out here having our little temple picnic, throwing our frisbees, which was invented in the Iron Age. Watch the iron frisbee. They're killers if you don't catch them. So anyway, and here comes Jonah, spit up on the beach right there. It could have happened. However it happened. The other thing is he was out in the Mediterranean Sea. He got spit up, and he had to walk across the desert, all smelly, like he did, and then still preach. And, he walked. This says this city took 3 days to walk through. So, it took 3 days to walk through. So you figure if you could walk 6 miles a day, that's not too much if you're power walking. If you're doing a Tiffany power walk, maybe you walk 10 miles in a day. But you do a power walk 6 miles in a day. So 18 miles is how stretched across this was. So this is a massive kind of city. It's a massive kind of city. But by the time he got a third of the way through it, the group of people repented. That's the story. Jonah wasn't happy about it. But for 100 years, Nineveh was protected. The Assyrians were given a measure of grace and a measure of testimony to worship. Do you remember the guy from the whale? Do you remember what he said? And many people probably received the message and believed on the God of heaven. Nahum is another book in the Old Testament, a short book in the Old Testament. It tells the story of what happened when Nineveh turned back to its idols. And Nineveh turned back to its idols, and they were destroyed. And their primary reason for destruction is their army was killed in a day. You know the story, right? We know the story from Isaiah and Hezekiah. King Hezekiah spread the matter before the Lord. 185,000 troops are surrounding Jerusalem. This is so how do civilizations survive? What's the big thing? Food. So how do you make a city capitulate? How do you make a city surrender? You cut off their food. A siege. You surround them. So the whole thing is that city of Jerusalem is surrounded by 185,000 Assyrian warriors. And they are being mocked, and they are being told that the other gods, the gods of this country, the other gods didn't save them. Your God is not going to save you. And, God sent a single angel and struck dead 185,000. And the next day, or a few days later or something, the king, this king, Sennacherib, was worshiping in the temple of his God, and his sons killed him. That's a great religion, when your family comes to church to kill you. So there you go. That's the end of that story. So that's the fall of, that gave rise to the next great civilization, which we know as the Babylonian civilization, and it's mentioned in the Bible too. Excuse me. A coalition, really, the Babylonians were like a coalition of the Medes, the Scythians. You've probably heard of the Scythians. A Scyth is still sort of named for one of their iron weapons and tools. So Scythians and Chaldeans, Medes, Assyrians, they overthrew the Assyrians. Medes, Chaldeans, and Scythians, they overthrew. They were like three cultures that joined together and overthrew Assyria, and who was weakened in this attempt in 2 Kings 20 to try and take Jerusalem. Okay, so Babylon became a rich, prosperous capital. Now we have, several pictures of Babylon here. We want to look at, where is it? Okay, come on. I got it. There we go. Okay, we see these, maybe that's not the best one, but this is like the hanging gardens of Babylon. These hanging gardens of Babylon, this is the way the city was sort of structured. There we go, that's maybe a better picture. The city was structured with these hanging gardens. They're not really hanging, but this is the kind of, the kind of things they were doing. They were growing things on the terraces. It's one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, is these hanging gardens of Babylon. And you can see, I think you can see, if you look closely, you can see some of the irrigation and the little waterfalls that are going on in there, and how they irrigated up there to put fruit trees and all kinds of things there. And how they did that was a wonder to the ancient people. And so they had this. Babylon turned into a rich, prosperous city with a large wall around it. Ancient city. So it achieved its greatest status, 2 Kings 24:25, under Nebuchadnezzar. He's mentioned throughout the Bible. He's a very important king to us throughout the Bible, Nebuchadnezzar. He's mentioned... Well, how do I spell that? I've got to make sure I spell it right for y'all. Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, Nebuchadnezzar. He's the one that established this capital as it was, this great capital. And this is the man that had the relationship with Daniel, very close relationship with Daniel. And we read about him in the Bible, Daniel 1-5, Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was chastised for not giving glory to the God of heaven, and he became a madman, and he was driven out into into what? He was driven out into the wilderness. He was driven out into the wilderness, and for a space of 7 years, and then he came back. But Nebuchadnezzar, the Bible seems to indicate that he gave glory to God, and God restored him. So I'm thinking that it's very possible that even though he tried to kill the 3 Hebrew boys in the fiery furnace, but he believed, Nebuchadnezzar believed, he believed Jeremiah. He believed Jeremiah, and he tried to bring Jeremiah. He wanted Jeremiah to come to Babylon. He knew his words. He believed Daniel, and he believed the 3 Hebrew boys. So you have a record of this, and then we know that only sons are chastised. We see that Nebuchadnezzar is chastised for not giving God glory. And then when he gets right, he comes back to his authority. So in my opinion is that we'll see Nebuchadnezzar in heaven. He had a great dream that forecast the way, and that's another story. That's for another class. But eschatology had a great dream of him being, and he was this world rule that he had. The Egyptian civilization has been compromised. We'll talk about the Egyptians next week because they lead directly into the establishment of the nation of Israel. But the Egyptian civilization has been compromised because of what God did to it, swallowed up their army. So Babylon is the first real world empire to control all of that territory. The Greeks will come. Alexander's coming in a couple of years. And then the Roman Empire will come. But Babylon, they destroyed the city of Tyre, which was a little city that was on a little island, and they built a great thing to destroy that. They took Egypt, and so Babylon had the greatest breadth of control to any civilization to that point. Excuse me. But the thing is there was Nebuchadnezzar, and then after him came this man, Belshazzar. And, sorry, wrong one. Let me get that back. Okay, we'll go back to the pictures here. Belshazzar, we have a picture of I always wanted to get a Rembrandt into my class, so I did tonight. How about that? You ever want to use a Rembrandt? How many like art? I sort of can get lost in an art museum and really look at pictures for a long time. There it is. There you go. Belshazzar, many tekel, that's the Upsaron, Parson, Upsaron. He sees the writing on the wall there. It says, there's a very kind expression there. It says his hips were loosed. It means he wet himself. That's what it means. The Bible's very, King James English, like Saul went into the cave to cover his feet. That means he had to go to the bathroom. And the same thing, it means his joints were loosed. He wet himself. You see a finger of God behind you, I think I'd wet myself. So this we read about in Daniel, of course. Daniel, we read about it. Daniel and his 3 friends became important people in the Babylonian Empire, which was very short for an empire. It was very short. 712 was the Assyrian Empire. In 612, the Assyrians were taken over by the Babylonians. The Babylonians came and they took, in 536, they took all of Judah, destroyed the temple at Jerusalem. In 586, they destroyed the temple at Jerusalem and brought everybody, as many Jews as they could drive across the desert, into Babylon, including Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And we know their stories from the book of Daniel and just how they had influence in the circle. This young man did not believe, he didn't even know who Daniel was. And, he's partying with the Lord's vessels. They bring the cups. Go get the cups from the temple in Israel. We're having a party, And they drank out of it, and this was his end. That night he was killed. And that night the next empire came into being, which was the Medes and the Persians. So the downfall, the thing is that's interesting, let's read Isaiah, turn to Isaiah 13. I want to tell you something, and I want to show you some modern pictures of Babylon. Excuse me. Sorry, don't know where I got this little, just maybe screamed too much at the TV yesterday. Sorry. Hey, it says here that the burden of Babylon, lift up your, it says, I've commanded my sanctified ones, verse 3 of Isaiah 13. In Isaiah 13, it says, God forecasts the destruction of Babylon and its downfall. He will not allow Babylon to be, it says here in verse 21, 20, it shall never be inhabited, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation. Neither shall the Arabian pitch a tent there. Neither shall the shepherds make their fold there, but the wild beasts of the desert shall lie there, and their houses shall become full of doleful creatures. Owls and demons, satyrs, shall dance there, and the wild beasts of the islands shall cry in their desolate houses, dragons in their pleasant palaces. Her time is come near to come, and her days shall not be prolonged. So, when we look through here, we can see, I'll show you, this is the Ishtar Gate. This is pretty magnificent in person. It's in a museum in Berlin called the Pergamum Museum. And if you go to that museum, if you're ever in Berlin, you can see that, the Ishtar Gate, that's actually reconstructed pieces that they excavated from Babylon in the 1800s. You can also see Satan's seat that's mentioned from Pergamus. They brought that back from Pergamus, and it's also in this same museum. And you go up these giant steps, and you'll see in Pergamus there was this sacrificial altar to a god, and that's mentioned in Revelation. And they brought this to Berlin. And there's a legend, and they say, and the Germans tell me it's not really a legend, that Adolf Hitler and several of his men actually had like a dinner on Satan's seat in there at a certain time early in the Third Reich's rise to power. So it's kind of creepy. That's kind of creepy, but it is like you go in there and you walk up there and you come to, and it's really interesting to be close to things that are from the Bible. It's like it's really wild, and it's that was like a really great experience to be there. So if you're ever in Berlin, go to the Pergamon Museum and you can see Satan's seat and you can see this Ishtar Gate from Babylon. Now the thing that's tried to happen over the course of these last few decades, Saddam Hussein, one of his primary things was to rebuild Babylon. One of his primary things was to rebuild Babylon. That's one of his palaces there on the hill. That's one of Saddam Hussein's palaces there that's now occupied by the United States military, right? I think Marines live there now. But this is Babylon. This destruction is Babylon. That's what's left of Babylon. And we do have some pictures of what Saddam Hussein really tried to start rebuilding it. This is a reconstruction of the Ishtar Gate there. You can see like the Jersey walls there. Those aren't ancient at all. Those were brought over from the New Jersey Turnpike. We had to get rid of them, so we took them to Iraq. But you can see there that's what Saddam Hussein tried to. He tried to rebuild this. He fashioned himself as the next Nebuchadnezzar. So that's and you can see that that's the kind of destruction that's happened. There's nothing living there now, So he didn't get there. He actually built. They're very, when archaeologists got there, they cried. Archaeologists cried because Saddam Hussein built 20th century bricks on top of the ancient bricks, and you can see like the wall where he started to build, and then the ancient walls are still there, and it's like it's defiling the wall, But this actual Istar Gate was found in the 1800s and shipped to Berlin, and it's pretty interesting to look at. So the Medes and the Persians, this will be the last thing we mention here. The Medes and the Persians, after that in Daniel, the Medes and the Persians came and they conquered Babylon, and they had a different kind of government. Their government was not so, this kind of government. Nebuchadnezzar's was like one man with counselors, and with counselors, and he pretty much did what he wanted. And but the Medes Persians, we know this because Daniel was thrown in the lion's den because they had a system of law that they respected, and they were 120 satraps. This is sort of like a congress of wise men, supposedly. And Daniel was one of the top 3 of these wise men. So with a lot of jealousy, he's a Hebrew slave captured and a prisoner of war, and he is Darius the Great is the one thing, and he also served under Cyrus the Great. Darius and Cyrus the Great. So these 2 men are mentioned in the Bible. Darius is the man that threw him into the lion's den against his wishes and then prayed all night. And then Daniel was, maybe we'll see Darius in heaven too, because he also believed in the God of Daniel after that and made laws that everyone should worship the God of. Actually, this is very interesting. We'll read this. We'll finish with this part. This is really interesting. Xerxes also. This Xerxes the first is mentioned, and then there's this Artaxerxes. This is Ahasuerus that's mentioned in Artaxerxes the first. This is Ahasuerus that's mentioned in the book of Esther. So these 4 Medo-Persian kings, Darius, Cyrus the Great, Xerxes, and Artaxerxes, they were very respectful. Maybe because they came from the tribe of Shem, but they were very respectful to the God of heaven and to the Hebrew people. And that they brought in, they listened to Daniel. Darius listened to Daniel. And it grew strong. And, Nehemiah also Xerxes, that's the one that's in Esther. Nehemiah is Artaxerxes, Xerxes' son. So here you have Darius was served by Daniel, Cyrus by Daniel, Xerxes by Esther and Mordecai, and this one was served by Nehemiah. These are all real people from the Bible, and they're in history here for us. The primary religion of the Persians was Zoroastrianism. I don't know if you know that. You probably heard of that before, but they had a idea of many gods, and just the idea that one creator, one supreme force over all creations. And so they had an idea of one primary God there. But it's interesting. Let's see. Darius, we'll read this in Ezra. If you turn to Ezra, and we'll finish this part. We'll take our second break. In Ezra, this is just really comforting to read. In Ezra 6 and in Ezra 7. I'm sorry. In Ezra 6 and Ezra 7, where is it? Okay. Moreover, this is Darius. I make a decree to the elders in Jerusalem that these Jews building this house of God, that the king's good, the tribute, and even the taxes beyond the river, be given to these men, they be not hindered. and that which they have need of, even of animals for sacrifice. You read that there. Verse 10, that they may offer sacrifices of sweet savor to the God of heaven and pray for the king and his sons. I have made a decree. Now you got to remember, what country is Persia now? It is Iran. And they still recognize Darius and Cyrus and Artaxerxes and Xerxes as great kings in their past. And this is what the great kings of Iran said to people who tried to touch Israel and Jerusalem. I have made a decree, whoever alters this word, let a timber be pulled from his house and set him up. Let him be hanged thereon, and let his house be made a dunghill for this. And the God that caused his name to dwell there destroy all kings and people that shall put their hand to alter and destroy the house of God which is at Jerusalem. I, Darius, have made this decree. It shall be done with speed. So that's the first curse. So if you wonder why Israel, little tiny Israel, can't be pushed into the ocean, this is why. This is why. Because the promise and the curse of their own heathen king is telling them, you can't do it. Whoever is commanded by the God of heaven, let it be diligently done. This is Xerxes in chapter 7. It says, let it be done diligently for the house of God of heaven. For why should there be wrath against the realm of the king and his sons? Verse 24, I certify you, touching any of the priests, the Levites, the singers, the porters, anybody working in the temple. You cannot touch them. You cannot touch them. Who will ever not, and verse 26, who will ever not do the law of God and the law of the king, let judgment be executed speedily upon him, whether it be death, banishment, or confiscation of goods, or imprisonment. So, that's the promise of these Persian kings. This one, Darius, and this one, Xerxes. That's the promise to their people, not to the people of Israel. This is the promise to their people. You wonder why. You get worried reading the news like Iran is developing nuclear weapons. God is going to make sure that Israel's still there. You read in Revelation and you see Israel is still there. So is Israel going anywhere? No, they aren't. Who cursed their own people? You wonder why they can't push them into the sea. This is why. It's there. Just read the Bible. The history reveals the truth of the Bible. Okay, so it's 10 after 8. We'll take a little break. We'll start at 20 after.